Tobacco Routt Mountains, Montana Territory, 1889. While 23 established miners hurried to finish their 12 by 14-foot log cabins before winter locked down the valley, Jack Thornton arrived on November 8th, exactly 47 days after the last sensible prospector had sealed his chinking. The settlement's judgment came fast and merciless. Jim Morrison, a 3-year veteran of Montana winters, called it suicide. Any damn fool knows you need 4 walls and a roof. But Thornton carried knowledge the others didn't. 3 years spent learning from Lakota and Blackfoot engineers who had endured Montana winters for generations. Instead of cutting pine for cabin walls, he began digging into the root system of a massive spruce, an excavation 8 feet long, 6 feet wide, and 4.5 feet deep. The miners called him a fool. They called it a grave. No one could understand why a man would choose a hole in the ground over proper shelter. Then December arrived with 8 straight days between 20 and 35 degrees below zero. Morrison's cabin dropped to 12 degrees inside, despite burning through nearly his entire winter wood supply. Webb's chinking failed completely, cold air flooding through gaps faster than flame could warm the space. Sanderson abandoned sleep, feeding his fire every 2 hours just to keep his cabin above freezing. But Thornton's underground shelter maintained a steady 50 degrees. He slept through the nights, burning only a quarter of the wood his neighbors consumed. What did this prospector understand about Earth's thermal properties and indigenous engineering that 3 years of frontier experience had taught everyone else to dismiss? If you value stories of practical wisdom that stood the test of time, make sure to subscribe. We've got more documented accounts worth remembering. Comment your city and state. We love seeing where these historical lessons reach. The first snow had already dusted the Tobacco Routt peaks when Jack Thornton's pack horse stepped carefully down the narrow mining trail on November 8, 1889. Behind him lay 3 seasons of prospecting across Dakota Territory, Wyoming, and Colorado. 3 seasons that taught lessons no mining handbook recorded. At his side hung the tool that marked him as either seasoned or reckless, a Blackfoot-made digging stick tipped with iron, traded for tobacco at Fort Benton 3 months earlier, while most men were purchasing axes and saws. 23 miners had already staked claims along Alder Creek. The valley rang with the familiar sounds of frontier building, axes striking pine, draw knives peeling bark, logs thudding into place. Every man followed the same proven formula: 12 by 14-foot layout, 7 feet walls, pine log construction, mud and grass chinking, shake roof, central fireplace. The math was universal: 6 to 8 weeks minimum to build proper shelter. Winter's killing cold, 3 weeks away at most. Jim Morrison straightened from his chinking work as Thornton's horse approached the last unclaimed plot. Morrison had survived 3 Montana winters and built 4 conventional cabins using techniques learned from Norwegian and German miners who understood mountain cold. His current cabin represented accumulated frontier wisdom: thick walls, tight seams, maximum interior space for wood storage. The sight of a newcomer arriving so late stirred equal parts concern and scorn. "Any damn fool knows you need 4 walls and a roof," Morrison called out. "Ground'll freeze you dead in 2 nights." His warning carried weight. His own structure stood 6 logs high, gaps carefully packed with clay-rich mud mixed with dried grass. The shake roof framework already supported split cedar shingles. This was how civilized men survived Montana winters: discipline, preparation, respect for altitude and cold. Thornton dismounted without argument, his focus drawn instead to the towering old-growth spruce dominating his claim. The tree rose nearly 90 feet, trunk measuring 18 feet around at chest height. More important than its height was its root system, spreading nearly 30 feet in every direction, creating natural drainage that had kept the soil stable and dry for centuries. He walked slowly around it, searching the ground as his Blackfoot guide once taught him, searching not for walls to build, but shelter already engineered by nature. "This tree's been staying warm longer than white man been in Montana," Thornton said quietly, running his hand along the bark. Pete Sanderson laughed from his nearly completed cabin.
He had arrived from Minnesota with solid carpentry skills and 2 winches experience. His structure followed textbook design: maximum space, proper chinking, strong roof beams. "Even Indians use teepees, not holes in the ground," Charlie Webb called out from downstream. Webb had survived one harsh winter in shared quarters and now trusted thick walls, central fireplace, and careful ventilation to keep him alive. To them, anything else bordered on insanity. But Thornton had survived the previous February in a Lakota earth lodge after his own conventional cabin failed during a blizzard. That winter reshaped his understanding. Indigenous engineering wasn't primitive, it was refined by centuries of testing. Underground construction worked with the land, not against it. Below the frost line, Earth's temperature remained steady at roughly 45 degrees year-round. Living tree trunks acted as thermal mass, absorbing warmth during the day and releasing it slowly at night. Root systems ensured drainage. Snow provided insulation. Smaller spaces heated faster and held warmth longer, requiring far less fuel. The divide ran deep. Conventional miners prioritized interior volume, space to stack 8 cords of pine, the minimum Morrison calculated necessary for survival. Central fireplaces against exterior walls maximized usable floor area. Thornton prioritized thermal efficiency over volume. His Blackfoot guide explained the math plainly: stable earth temperature, dense living wood, minimal exposed surface area, controlled airflow.
"You're digging your own grave, fool," Morrison shouted as Thornton began marking the excavation with his iron-tipped stick. The dimensions revealed deliberate planning: 8 feet long for sleeping and storage, 6 feet wide to fit between major roots without weakening the spruce, 4.5 feet deep at the center, tapering to 3 feet near the trunk where the tree itself would form one entire wall. The other miners paused their work to watch. Webb set down his draw knife, uneasy. Sanderson climbed off his roof frame. Even Morrison stopped chinking, torn between obligation to intervene and disbelief at what he witnessed. Thornton ignored them. He studied soil layers beneath the spruce. 2 centuries of fallen needles formed an 18-inch insulating duff layer. Beneath that lay sandy loam, dry, stable, showing no signs of seasonal pooling or frost heave. The spruce's vast root network had drained and stabilized the ground for generations. By evening, he had excavated 18 inches across the entire perimeter. Major roots curved naturally around his design. Smaller roots created air pockets that would add insulation. As dusk settled over the valley, Morrison's final words drifted across the claims. 3 weeks till killing cold, and you're still playing in the dirt like a child. November 9th dawned sharp and bitter, frost silvering the valley grass as Thornton resumed digging with steady precision. His iron-tipped stick cut through the remaining layers cleanly, confirming the calculations his Blackfoot guide had shared months earlier during long conversations scented with tobacco smoke. The decomposed needles gave way to sandy loam that crumbled dry in his hands, earth untouched by standing water, free of frost damage. Morrison stepped from his cabin at sunrise, tin cup steaming in the cold air, and found himself once again drawn to the sight of a man dismantling every accepted rule of frontier survival. "Day 2 of the fool's funeral preparations," he announced loudly enough for Webb and Sanderson to hear across their respective claims. The commentary had become morning ritual, a mixture of genuine concern and professional bewilderment at techniques that violated every principle of frontier construction wisdom. By noon on November 10th, Thornton had reached 3.5 feet depth across the entire perimeter, his excavation revealing the critical discovery that would vindicate his entire approach. The soil temperature at this depth measured exactly 45 degrees, precisely what traditional knowledge had promised. Below the frost line, Earth maintained consistent temperature regardless of surface conditions, creating a natural heat reservoir that conventional cabin construction ignored completely. The massive spruce trunk provided one complete wall that required no construction materials, its bark naturally waterproof after centuries of Montana weather. Sanderson abandoned his roof work entirely by the afternoon, fascination overcoming his schedule pressure as he watched Thornton map the Routt system like an underground blueprint. Major roots channeled water away from the excavation naturally, their placement creating drainage channels that had functioned effectively for 3 centuries. Minor roots formed air pockets throughout the surrounding soil, providing natural insulation that no conventional chinking method could replicate. The tree's living wood maintained higher temperature than dead construction lumber, adding thermal mass that would store and release heat throughout the winter months. Even badgers got more sense than that prospector, Webb called from his claim, but his tone carried less certainty than previous days. The excavation revealed engineering sophistication that challenged assumptions about proper frontier building methods. Webb had stopped making jokes entirely, genuinely puzzled by construction techniques that seemed simultaneously primitive and sophisticated. Sanderson openly admitted confusion, telling Morrison that the roof system showed better understanding of load distribution than some conventional cabin designs he'd seen fail under snow loads. The entrance design revealed the most sophisticated element of Thornton's thermal engineering. A 4-foot tunnel angled upward from the main chamber to surface level, creating an airlock effect that would prevent heat loss while allowing access. Cold air would settle in the tunnel depression, while warm air remained stratified in the main living space, a principle of physics that conventional cabin construction fought against rather than utilizing. The entrance faced southeast away from prevailing northwest winds while maximizing solar heat gain during brief winter daylight hours. Interior layout reflected months of planning, refined by practical experience. The sleeping area occupied an 18-inch raised platform cut directly into the root mass, providing natural insulation below and behind the occupant. The fire pit consisted of a small, shallow depression lined with creekstones, designed for maximum heat efficiency rather than impressive flames. Every cubic foot of space served multiple functions: storage, insulation, structural support, and thermal management working together as an integrated system. November 12th brought completion of the basic structure as the first snowflakes began drifting across the valley. A 4-inch diameter ventilation hole through the roof structure offset from center to prevent downdrafts would allow smoke escape while minimizing heat loss. The technique copied Plains Indian methods that Thornton had studied during his winter with the Lakota family, where proper ventilation prevented both suffocation and excessive heat loss. Day 4 of watching a man prepare his own grave, Morrison muttered. But his daily commentary now carried undertones of uncertainty. The roof construction displayed engineering knowledge that challenged his assumptions about proper frontier building methods. Webb had stopped making jokes entirely, genuinely puzzled by construction techniques that seemed simultaneously primitive and sophisticated. Sanderson openly admitted confusion, telling Morrison that the roof system showed better understanding of load distribution than some conventional cabin designs he'd seen fail under snow loads. The entrance design revealed the most sophisticated element of Thornton's thermal engineering: a 4-foot tunnel angled upward from the main chamber to surface level, creating an airlock effect that would prevent heat loss while allowing access. Cold air would settle in the tunnel depression, while warm air remained stratified in the main living space, a principle of physics that conventional cabin construction fought against rather than utilizing. The entrance faced southeast away from prevailing northwest winds while maximizing solar heat gain during brief winter daylight hours. Interior layout reflected months of planning, refined by practical experience. The sleeping area occupied an 18-inch raised platform cut directly into the root mass, providing natural insulation below and behind the occupant. The fire pit consisted of a small, shallow depression lined with creekstones, designed for maximum heat efficiency rather than impressive flames. Every cubic foot of space served multiple functions: storage, insulation, structural support, and thermal management working together as an integrated system. November 12th brought completion of the basic structure as the first snowflakes began drifting across the valley. A 4-inch diameter ventilation hole through the roof structure offset from center to prevent downdrafts would allow smoke escape while minimizing heat loss. The technique copied Plains Indian methods that Thornton had studied during his winter with the Lakota family, where proper ventilation prevented both suffocation and excessive heat loss. Morrison called across the claim boundary one final time as snow began falling in earnest. "Still time to build something that won't kill you, fool." But his voice carried less conviction than previous days. the completed structure displaying engineering principles that challenged 3 years of frontier construction experience. The blizzard struck without warning on November 16th, transforming the Tobacco Root Valley from autumn mining camp to Arctic battleground in less than 18 hours. Temperature plummeted 47 degrees between dawn and midnight, dropping from a manageable 23 degrees to a bone-crushing 24 below zero. Wind reached sustained 35 miles per hour with gusts hitting 60, driving 28 inches of snow horizontally across the exposed mining claims. Even by Montana standards, this represented an unusually early and severe storm that caught established miners with incomplete winter preparations. Morrison's cabin, which had seemed adequately prepared just days earlier, immediately revealed critical weaknesses under the assault of genuine Arctic conditions. His carefully applied mud and grass chinking began cracking within hours as temperatures dropped, creating hairline fractures that widened into gaps, allowing frigid air to stream directly into the interior. The central fireplace, positioned against the exterior wall to maximize floor space, proved inadequate against the thermal demands of sustained sub-zero conditions. Despite burning through 8 cords of split pine per week, nearly double his calculated winter supply, interior temperatures struggled to reach 19 degrees. Webb's cabin suffered even more dramatic failures as the storm's full fury revealed fundamental flaws in conventional construction methods. His chinking failed catastrophically, gaps opening faster than he could repair them in the howling wind and driving snow. Cold air poured through the widening cracks at a rate that overwhelmed his fire's heating capacity, creating interior conditions barely distinguishable from the outdoor environment. With interior temperatures dropping to 8 degrees despite constant fire maintenance, Webb abandoned his shelter on the storm's second day, seeking emergency refuge with Sanderson. Sanderson's cabin, representing the most sophisticated conventional construction in the camp, demonstrated the inherent limitations of standard frontier building principles when confronted with extreme conditions. His 12 by 4 foot interior, designed to accommodate adequate wood storage and living space, became a liability under genuine survival conditions. The high ceiling provided comfortable headroom during mild weather, now allowed precious heat to rise away from the living area, creating temperature stratification that left floor level at 18 degrees while ceiling temperatures reached 32. The large interior volume that seemed advantageous during construction now required massive fuel consumption to achieve even marginal warmth. Meanwhile, 40 feet away and 8 feet underground, Thornton's tree kit shelter maintained interior conditions that defied every expectation of frontier survival wisdom. On November 16th, with outside temperatures at 22 below zero, his underground chamber registered 48 degrees. The Earth's stable thermal reservoir, dismissed by conventional builders as irrelevant, proved its value under genuine test conditions. Living tree roots surrounding the excavation provided thermal mass that absorbed heat during brief warming periods and released it slowly throughout the extended cold snap. The scientific principles underlying Thornton's success became evident as the storm continued. Earth below the frost line maintained its 45-degree baseline regardless of surface conditions, creating a natural heat foundation that conventional above-ground construction could never access. The massive spruce trunk eliminated heat loss through one complete wall, while its root system provided insulation values that manufactured materials couldn't match. Snow accumulation, reaching 4 feet deep by the storm's third day, added insulation equivalent to R value 15, while reducing heat loss through the roof structure by 85%. Air circulation in the underground shelter followed physics principles that worked with natural thermodynamics rather than fighting them. The low entrance created a thermal trap where cold air settled in the access tunnel while warm air stratified at sleeping level in the main chamber. This natural convection system required no energy input while maintaining temperature differentials that conventional cabins achieved only through constant fire maintenance.
Thornton's small fire pit heated the confined space quickly and efficiently, requiring only 6 to 8 pounds of wood daily compared to the 150 pounds consumed in standard cabins. By November 20th, the contrast between construction methods had become stark and undeniable. Morrison faced a fuel crisis that threatened his survival, having burned through his calculated monthly wood supply in just 5 days of extreme cold. Ice formed on his interior walls near the chinkencaps, creating conditions where breath froze and metal tools became too cold to handle with bare hands. Sleep became impossible without constant fire maintenance every 2 hours, leading to exhaustion that compounded the physical stress of inadequate heating. Webb's situation grew desperate as his abandoned cabin filled with snow through the failed chinking, rendering it uninhabitable even after emergency repairs. Sharing Sanderson's shelter created overcrowding that strained already inadequate heating capacity, forcing both men to burn furniture and mining equipment to supplement their dwindling firewood supplies. The social dynamics of the mining camp shifted as conventional wisdom confronted the reality of its own failure under test conditions. Sanderson, despite hosting Webb and maintaining the most sophisticated conventional shelter, found himself questioning 3 decades of construction experience as he watched his carefully planned heating system prove inadequate. His proper cabin design required constant attention, fire maintenance every 2 hours, including throughout the night, continuous monitoring of chinking gaps, and fuel consumption rates that threatened to exhaust his winter wood supply before January. The physical and mental exhaustion of maintaining marginal survival conditions in an inadequate shelter began taking its toll on all 3 conventional builders. Thornton's routine, by contrast, demonstrated the efficiency of working with natural systems rather than against them. He tended his small fire twice daily, morning and evening, burning only carefully selected dry wood that heated his confined space quickly and thoroughly. Sleep came naturally in 48-degree comfort without waking to stoke flames or shiver through inadequate heating. The dry interior allowed him to continue productive work, sharpening tools, repairing equipment, planning spring mining operations, while his neighbors struggled simply to maintain survival-level warmth. On November 28th, as the extended cold snap entered its 2nd week, Pete Sanderson approached Thornton's barely visible entrance. Exhaustion from sleep deprivation and constant fire tending had worn down his resistance to asking the question that challenged everything he thought he knew about frontier survival. "How warm you staying in there, Jack?" he called down the entrance tunnel, his voice carrying the weight of a man reconsidering fundamental assumptions about winter shelter. "Warm enough to work on my tools without gloves," came Thornton's reply from the 51-degree interior. Outside temperature measured 18 below zero. December arrived with conditions that would test every survival system to its absolute limits. The barometric pressure began dropping on December 10th, bringing the kind of Arctic air mass that veteran Montana miners recognize as potentially lethal. By December 12th, temperatures had plunged to 28 below zero and continued falling. What followed would become known in territorial weather records as the coldest sustained period in the Tobacco Root Mountains since 1864, an 8-day siege of killing cold that pushed frontier survival methods beyond their design parameters. The Morrison brothers' crisis deepened with terrifying speed as their fuel calculations proved catastrophically inadequate. Jim Morrison had based his wood requirements on previous winter experiences, calculating that 15 cords would provide adequate heating through March. Instead, his cabin's heat loss through failed chinking and inadequate insulation created fuel demands that consumed his entire winter supply by December 15th. Interior temperatures dropped to 12 degrees despite burning furniture, mining equipment, and even floorboards torn up in desperation. The arithmetic of survival had turned against him. Each degree of warmth now cost exponentially more fuel than his supply could sustain. Jim Morrison's physical deterioration became evident as frostbite developed on his toes from sleeping in 15-degree conditions.
The injury represented more than immediate discomfort. Frostbitten extremities in December meant potential gangrene and death before spring medical assistance became available. His brother Tom, sharing the inadequate shelter, showed early signs of hypothermia, confused thinking, slurred speech, and the dangerous drowsiness that preceded unconsciousness. The conventional cabin that had seemed adequate during construction now functioned as little more than a windbreak. Webb's situation had evolved from shelter failure to complete abandonment. His original cabin, with its compromised chinking and damaged roof structure, filled entirely with snow during the December storms.
Even after seeking refuge with Sanderson, the shared shelter strained beyond its heating capacity with two men competing for warmth around a single fireplace. The overcrowding created new problems: increased carbon monoxide risk from overuse of the heating system, depleted oxygen from two men breathing in a sealed space, and accelerated fuel consumption that threatened both occupants' survival. Sanderson discovered that his proper cabin design became a systematic liability under genuine Arctic conditions. The 12x4 interior that provided comfortable living space during mild weather now created an impossible heating challenge. Heat rose immediately to the 7-foot ceiling, leaving the floor level where men actually slept at temperatures barely above freezing. The large interior volume required massive fuel input to achieve even marginal warmth. While the conventional fireplace design lost precious heat through the chimney faster than wood could be burned, sleep became a carefully managed survival exercise. 2 hours of rest, followed by mandatory fire maintenance repeated throughout each night. The fuel crisis facing all conventional builders revealed fundamental flaws in frontier heating calculations. Standard cabins required 12 to 15 cords of wood per month during extreme conditions, compared to pre-winter estimates of 6 to 8 cords. The mathematical impossibility became obvious. No miner had cut enough wood to sustain conventional heating through extended Arctic conditions. Desperation drove them to burn tools, furniture, structural elements from their own shelters, and even personal belongings that represented months of accumulated wealth. Thornton's measurements during the same period demonstrated the dramatic superiority of indigenous thermal engineering. On December 12th, with outside temperatures at 22 below zero, his shelter maintained 49 degrees. December 15th brought 28 below outside, while his interior registered 51 degrees. The worst day, December 18th, saw outside conditions drop to 35 below zero, while the tree pit shelter held steady at 48 degrees. December 20th recorded 31 below outside, with 50 degrees maintained underground. The technical analysis of Thornton's success revealed principles that conventional frontier wisdom had dismissed as primitive superstition. Underground temperature remained stable because Earth below the frost line maintained its 45-degree baseline regardless of surface conditions, a thermal reservoir that above-ground construction could never access. The living spruce trunk provided a thermal mass that absorbed heat during brief warning periods and released it slowly during temperature drops, creating a natural heating system that required no fuel input. Snow insulation, now reaching over 4 feet deep, created a complete thermal barrier with insulation values exceeding anything available to conventional construction. His fuel consumption statistics demonstrated efficiency that seemed impossible to conventional builders. Thornton used 1.2 cords total through December, while conventional cabins burned 12 to 15 cords, attempting to maintain barely survivable conditions. The small underground space heated quickly with minimal fuel input, retained heat for hours without maintenance, and provided comfortable working conditions that allowed productive activity rather than mere survival. He read by firelight, maintained and sharpened equipment, and slept full nights without waking to tend fires. December 18th brought the breaking point for conventional construction methods. Jim Morrison, facing immediate death from hypothermia and fuel exhaustion, made his way through 35 below conditions to Thornton's entrance. The act represented complete abandonment of 3 years of frontier building wisdom and professional pride.
"Jack, we're in trouble," Morrison called down the entrance tunnel. "Can't keep warm enough to live." The admission carried weight beyond immediate crisis, a recognition that fundamental assumptions about winter survival had proven wrong under test conditions. Thornton emerged from his 48-degree shelter into 35 below air, demonstrating temperature differentials that exceeded what Morrison experienced between his failing cabin and the outdoors. The visual evidence was undeniable. Thornton worked bare-handed for several minutes, while Morrison couldn't remove his gloves without immediate frostbite risk. The underground shelter dweller showed no signs of cold stress, moved normally, and displayed the physical condition of a man living in heated comfort rather than fighting for survival. The technical explanation Thornton provided represented centuries of indigenous engineering refined through generations of winter survival. Earth's stable temperature created a natural heat foundation. The thermal mass of living wood stored and released heat efficiently.
Snow insulation eliminated heat loss through proper roof design. The airlock entrance prevented cold infiltration while maintaining interior warmth. Minimal space heated quickly and retained temperature without constant fuel input. Every element worked together as an integrated system rather than fighting natural thermal dynamics. December 19th brought the community's formal surrender to methods they had mocked just weeks earlier. Sanderson requested permission to excavate a second tree pit near Thornton's successful design. Webb asked to share the existing shelter until he could construct proper underground quarters. Morrison, his pride finally overcome by the reality of imminent death, openly admitted his error. "Thought you were digging a grave. Turns out you were the only one building something that works." The transformation represented more than individual survival decisions. 3 experienced miners representing decades of accumulated frontier building knowledge had confronted the absolute failure of conventional methods under test conditions. Traditional indigenous engineering, dismissed as primitive ignorance, had proven superior in every measurable way. Fuel efficiency, interior comfort, construction time, material requirements, and ultimate survival effectiveness. Spring melt in March of 1890 revealed the winter's true accounting in stark, measurable terms that left no room for debate about competing survival methods. Thornton emerged from his tree pit shelter having gained 7 pounds during the brutal months. His physical condition actually improved by a winter of adequate rest and nutrition in comfortable temperatures. The conventional cabin dwellers presented a different story entirely. Morrison had lost 26 pounds, Webb 21, and Sanderson 19, their bodies showing the cumulative effects of months spent fighting inadequate heating systems and chronic sleep deprivation. The fuel consumption statistics told an equally dramatic story. Thornton had burned 4.2 cords of wood through the entire winter season, while the conventional cabins had consumed between 18 and 24 cords each in their desperate attempts to maintain survivable temperatures. Morrison's final tally included not just firewood, but furniture, floorboards, mining equipment, and personal belongings sacrificed to feed his failing heating system. The economic implications were staggering. Conventional heating had consumed winter fuel supplies worth more than most miners earned in a full season of successful prospecting. Construction time vindication proved equally significant. Thornton's 4-day building period, compared to the 6 to 8 weeks required for conventional cabin construction, represented a 90% reduction in labor investment. Material efficiency statistics were even more dramatic. His tree pit shelter used 90% less lumber than standard cabins, required no purchased materials except basic hand tools, and demanded zero maintenance throughout the winter season. Meanwhile, conventional structures required constant chinking repairs, roof patches to prevent snow infiltration, and continuous chimney cleaning to maintain adequate heating efficiency. Sanderson began construction of his own tree pit shelter in late March, applying lessons learned from observing Thornton's successful design throughout the winter months. His version measured 10 feet by 8 feet, incorporating improved entrance design elements that provided better security while maintaining thermal efficiency. The excavation process revealed the same soil conditions Thornton had exploited: stable temperatures below the frost
line, natural drainage through established root systems, and insulation properties of decomposed organic matter that conventional construction couldn't replicate. Webb's innovative approach demonstrated how traditional techniques could be adapted and expanded. His dual-chamber design included a separate workshop area connected to the main living space through a short tunnel, creating specialized zones for different activities while maintaining overall thermal efficiency. The workshop chamber allowed him to continue equipment maintenance and small-scale ore processing throughout the winter months, turning survival time into productive work periods. His entrance system incorporated a double airlock design that further improved heat retention while providing emergency exit options. Morrison's complete conversion represented the most dramatic acknowledgement of conventional wisdom's failure. He abandoned his partially collapsed cabin entirely, investing 2 weeks in spring construction of a tree pit shelter 40% larger than Thornton's original design. His engineering background helped him refine the structural elements, calculating optimal roof loads, improving drainage systems, and developing more sophisticated ventilation controls. The man who had led the winter's mockery became the technique's most enthusiastic advocate.
Summer of 1890 brought validation from unexpected sources as word of the tree pit method spread through regional mining networks. 12 additional miners arrived at tobacco roots specifically to learn underground shelter techniques before establishing their own claims. The newcomers represented experienced prospectors from Nevada, Colorado, and California who recognized superior survival technology when they encountered documented evidence of its effectiveness. Their presence transformed the valley from isolated mining camp to informal training ground for indigenous building methods. Technical documentation became systematic as miners recorded specific measurements, material requirements, and construction variations for different tree species and soil conditions. Sanderson maintained detailed logs of temperature differentials, fuel consumption rates, and structural performance throughout seasonal weather changes. Webb documented his dual-chamber innovations with precise drawings and material specifications. Morrison contributed engineering analysis of load-bearing calculations and drainage system design principles. Winter 1890–91 provided the ultimate test of widespread adoption. 18 tree pit shelters operated simultaneously in the Tobacco Root Valley, housing 34 miners who had abandoned conventional cabin construction entirely. The results were definitive. 0 cold weather casualties compared to the previous year's 3 deaths from hypothermia. Average fuel consumption reduced by 75% and construction costs lowered by 80% through elimination of purchased lumber requirements. Regional adoption accelerated as the technique spread to Beaverhead Mountains, Gallatin Range, and any location where large trees and suitable soil conditions allowed underground construction. Logging camps adapted the methods for temporary winter quarters, reducing their operational costs while improving worker survival rates. Trapping cabins throughout the northern Rockies incorporated tree pit principles, extending the viable season for fur harvesting in remote locations. Homesteader families adopted modified versions for emergency shelters and root cellars that provided both food storage and survival backup systems. The Montana Historical Society began preserving detailed records of tree pit construction techniques in 1895, recognizing their significance to regional settlement patterns and survival technology development. Museum displays documented the thermal principles, construction methods, and historical impact of indigenous engineering knowledge adapted by frontier miners. Modern archaeological studies conducted in the 1960s confirmed the superior thermal efficiency of abandoned mining camp tree pit sites compared to conventional cabin foundations. Scientific validation arrived through University of Montana engineering studies in 1987, which proved that Thornton's original design achieved R-value equivalent to modern construction using only 1889 materials and traditional knowledge. The research documented heat retention properties, structural integrity over decades of use, and environmental integration that contemporary building methods struggled to match. Thermal imaging studies revealed how earth-sheltered construction worked with natural systems rather than imposing artificial heating solutions on hostile environments. Thornton's own reflection, recorded in a 1923 interview when he was 68 years old, captured the fundamental lesson that extended beyond mining camp survival. It wasn't about being smarter than other miners, he explained to the Montana Pioneer History Project. It was about listening to people who'd survived Montana winters for centuries before we got here. Blackfoot didn't build tree pits because they were primitive, they built them because they worked. This statement summarized a principle that influenced modern earth-sheltered building, passive solar design, and thermal mass applications throughout the 20th century. Between 1889 and 1920, documented records showed tree pit shelters saved 47 lives in Montana mining camps, prevented countless cases of cold weather injury and hypothermia, and established construction techniques that influenced frontier building practices throughout the northern Rockies. The legacy extended beyond immediate survival benefits to demonstrate how traditional knowledge systems, dismissed as primitive by conventional wisdom, often contain sophisticated solutions refined through generations of practical testing under genuine survival conditions.